35 years ago, a 16-year-old girl in Federal Way, Washington, was murdered on her own high school campus, and the man who killed her walked away and kept walking for nearly 3 decades. Investigators had a full DNA profile from the crime scene within days. They ran it against the National Codes database for years. No match. The man who killed Sarah Yarborough was not in the system, not because he was unknown to law enforcement, but because the law had never required him to submit a sample. Detective Jim Allen worked the case for 15 years. He never closed it. Then in 2019, a forensic genealogist uploaded the crime scene DNA to a public ancestry database and traced a branch of the suspect's family tree back to a man who arrived in Massachusetts in 1630. What a 400-year-old family tree revealed about a 1991 murder, and how investigators used it to walk up to the man responsible and collect his DNA off a sidewalk, is the story of this case. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you like videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It was December 1991. The Cold War had ended weeks earlier, and the Pacific Northwest was in the middle of a construction boom that was quietly remaking its suburbs. Federal Way, Washington, one of dozens of mid-sized cities south of Seattle that had grown fast enough to incorporate that same year. Nirvana had just released Nevermind. The region that produced that record was, in a specific way, proud of the noise it was making. Federal Way in December meant gray skies that arrived in October and didn't leave until spring, frost on car roofs before dawn, the kind of cold that is wet rather than sharp. It was a working commuter city, not wealthy, not struggling, organized around school calendars and bus schedules and Saturday morning activities that filled the parking lots of its high schools with the cars of students who had places to be. Sarah Yarborough was 16 years old, a junior at Federal Way High School, where she was an honor student and a member of the school's drill team, a discipline that requires precision, early mornings, and the specific kind of commitment that means showing up even when the schedule is inconvenient. That Saturday she had a competition. That morning, she got ready and she left. Saturday, December 14, 1991. Sarah left her house early. She was in her drill team uniform. She had hot rollers still in her ponytail, she had done her hair for the performance and was running the clock in her head. She believed she was late. She drove her father's car. She arrived at Federal Way High School at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning and pulled into the back parking lot. The parking lot was empty. Her drill team was not scheduled to meet for another hour. The bus to the event in Kirkland did not depart until 9 a.m. Sarah had the time wrong. She was not late. She was an hour early, alone in a packed lot, in a car, on a Saturday morning when the school was not yet in session and no one was expected to be there and no one was watching. To anyone passing, there was nothing unusual about what that looked like. At some point after she parked, Sarah left the car. The confirmed record does not document how. No witness saw the initial contact. What the record does confirm is that she ended up approximately 300 feet north of where she parked, in an area of overgrown brush near the tennis courts, in a part of the campus that was not visible from the parking lot. Shortly after 9 a.m., 2 boys, 13 years old, cutting through the school grounds on their way to go skateboarding, noticed a man step out of the brush on an embankment ahead of them. He kept to himself. He walked away quickly. The boys didn't stop. They kept moving through the grounds, and a short distance later, in the brush, they found Sarah. They ran to the nearest house and told the adults inside. Someone called 911. Sergeant Michael Hatch of the King County Sheriff's Office was the first homicide detective to arrive on scene. She had been strangled with her own nylons. She still had hot rollers in her hair. She was running late. She was already thinking about the performance. That was the last morning Sarah Yarborough ever got ready for anything. When the drill team bus was ready to leave for Kirkland at 9 a.m., Sarah Yarborough was not there to board it. Her car was in the parking lot. Sarah was not in it. That sequence, car present, person absent, is what started the alarm. By then, the 2 boys had already found her. Sarah had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The cause of death was manual strangulation using her own nylons. Sergeant Michael Hatch and the King County Sheriff's investigators who processed the scene that morning worked it carefully. What they recovered in that brush, in the cold, on that December morning, would determine everything that came after. From the semen on Sarah's clothing and the DNA recovered from beneath her fingernails, investigators were able to extract a complete male DNA profile. A single contributor. Clean. Intact. In 1991, DNA profiling was new enough that prosecutors at trial would later describe that year as really the dawn of DNA. What the technology could do in 1991 was establish a profile. What it could not do was search beyond the limited databases that existed at the time. The profile was preserved. The question of whose it was remained entirely open. The crime scene told investigators several things. The location, 300 feet north of the parking lot, in overgrown brush not visible from the road, was not a place someone stumbles into. Getting there required either willingness or force, and Sarah's team uniform, her car still running on the clock she thought she was behind, her proximity to the school she had no reason to leave. None of it suggested she walked there by choice. The window that made it possible was already visible in the facts. She had been alone in an empty lot for an hour before anyone expected her. The crime was completed before her drill team ever assembled. Investigators had a full biological profile of the man who killed Sarah Yarborough. What they did not have was a name. The King County Sheriff's Office opened a homicide investigation immediately. Thousands of tips came in over the following weeks and months. Investigators used hypnosis, polygraphs, and FBI profiling resources. Composite sketches of the suspect, a white male approximately 6 feet tall with long blonde or light brown hair, were distributed publicly. The two boys who had seen a man exit the brush that morning were the closest thing to eyewitnesses the case had. The investigation did not produce an arrest, because the man who killed Sarah Yarborough was structurally invisible to every tool investigators were using. Patrick Nicholas had a documented history of sexual violence before December 14, 1991. Investigators would eventually learn of at least 5 prior sexual assaults. But none of those prior offenses had required him to submit a DNA sample. His profile did not exist in any database. Each time detectives ran the crime scene DNA through Cody's, and they ran it repeatedly over years as the database grew, the search returned nothing. Not because the evidence was weak. Because the man it belonged to had never been required to contribute to the system designed to find people like him. That was not a failure of investigative effort. It was a structural gap in the law. Detective Jim Allen inherited the case in 2004 and worked it for the next 15 years. He submitted dozens of DNA samples from persons of interest, excluding them one by one. Thousands of tips. Dozens of names ruled out. The profile from the crime scene remained unmatched. The biological evidence from December 14, 1991, collected by Sergeant Hatch and preserved through 3 decades of technological change, remained in storage. Detective Jim Allen joined the Sarah Yarborough case in 2004, 13 years after the murder. He worked it for the next 15 years until he retired. In that time he submitted dozens of DNA samples from persons of interest, excluding each one. He pursued every lead the file contained and ran the crime scene profile through Cody's repeatedly as the national database expanded. The match never came. What Allen also did in 2004 was keep asking a different kind of question. Not just who matches this profile, but what else can this profile tell us? In 2011, 20 years after the murder, Allen contacted Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, founder of Identifiers International, a California-based forensic genealogy firm. Fitzpatrick was one of the earliest practitioners of a method that had not yet been used widely in criminal investigations. Using DNA not to search a criminal database but to search ancestry databases, the kind populated by people tracing their family histories, and build a family tree outward from an unknown sample. What Fitzpatrick found in 2011 was a partial result. The crime scene DNA connected to a family line traceable to a man named Robert Fuller, who had settled in Massachusetts in 1630. It was a branch of a tree, not a name. But it was the first directional lead the case had produced in 2 decades. As Allen recalled to reporters, "It's been solvable from the beginning. We had witnesses, we had a real tight solid timeline, we had a full DNA profile from the beginning. Thousands of tips. You would have thought the case would have been solved by now." He retired before it was. He passed the case to Detective Kathleen Decker. 28 years after Sarah Yarborough left her house with hot rollers in her hair, a man dropped a cigarette on the ground outside a laundromat in Kent, and the case broke open. In 2018, Detective Kathleen Decker re-engaged Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick under a new contract. The technology available in 2018 was meaningfully different from what had existed in 2011. The genetic genealogy field had advanced, and in April 2018 the arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, had demonstrated publicly what the method could now accomplish. That case used a database called GeneMatch, a publicly accessible platform where individuals upload raw DNA data from consumer testing kits to find relatives. Law enforcement had begun using the same platform to search for suspects. The method works like this. A conventional DNA database like Cody's compares a crime scene profile directly against profiles of convicted offenders. It is a direct match system. Either the person is in the database or they are not. Forensic genetic genealogy operates on an entirely different principle. Instead of looking for the suspect directly, it looks for the suspect's relatives, people who share enough DNA with the unknown profile to indicate a biological family connection. Those partial matches are then used to build a family tree. The genealogist traces the tree outward, generation by generation, using public records, birth certificates, census data, obituaries, marriage records, until the branches narrow to a set of living individuals who could plausibly be the source of the original profile, given their age, sex, and geographic proximity to the crime. In 2019, Decker provided Fitzpatrick with DNA segments extracted from the original 1991 crime scene evidence, the same biological material that Sergeant Hatch's team had preserved on the Federal Way High School campus 28 years earlier. Fitzpatrick uploaded the profile to GEDmatch. The search returned partial matches. Fitzpatrick's team built the family tree upward and outward from those matches. The branches led back, as the 2011 work had suggested, to the Fuller family line. In September 2019, the tree narrowed to two living brothers, Edward Nicholas and Patrick Nicholas. Edward Nicholas was eliminated immediately. Because of a prior rape conviction, his DNA profile was already in Cody's, and it did not match the crime scene profile. That left his brother. Patrick Nicholas, then 55 years old, lived in Covington, Washington. He had taken a bus route that passed Federal Way High School at the time of the murder. He was 27 years old in December 1991. Undercover detectives placed Nicholas under surveillance. They followed him to a laundromat. Outside, he smoked 2 cigarettes and dropped both butts on the ground, along with a paper napkin. Detectives collected all 3 items. The DNA extracted from those cigarette butts matched the profile from Sarah Yarborough's clothing and from beneath her fingernails. It was the same profile Sergeant Hatch's team had recovered on the morning of December 14, 1991, preserved through 3 decades, waited on by a family and a series of detectives who did not stop running it. On October 2, 2019, Patrick Leon Nicholas was arrested. The conclusion the crime scene had pointed toward from the first day, a single male contributor, a specific biological identity, had a name. The DNA did not point to someone in Sarah's life. It did not point to a classmate, a coach, a family acquaintance, or anyone connected to the drill team or Federal Way High School. There was no relationship. There was no prior contact. There was no reason, in any conventional investigative framework, that Patrick Nicholas and Sarah Yarborough would ever have been in the same database. Patrick Leon Nicholas was a stranger. He was 27 years old in December 1991 and lived in the area. Investigators determined that he regularly traveled a bus route that passed Federal Way High School. That is the full extent of what connected him to that parking lot on that morning. He had no tie to the school, no tie to the family, no tie to the drill team. He was present because the route brought him near, and Sarah was present because she had the time wrong. That is what the masking detail resolves. The hour she spent alone in the back parking lot, the hour created by a scheduling error, the hour when no one was looking for her because no one yet expected her, was not manufactured by Nicholas. He did not arrange for her to be isolated. He found her isolated. The window that made the crime possible was ordinary circumstance. An empty lot. A Saturday morning. A teenager who thought she was late. His prior history clarified the rest. Senior Deputy Prosecutor Mary Barbosa documented in the state's sentencing memo that in at least 4 prior attacks, Nicholas had approached women near their cars, produced a knife, and forced them to walk with him to secluded areas. The brush north of the parking lot at Federal Way High School was consistent with that pattern in every particular. The profile the crime scene had described in 1991, a single male contributor, had 32 years later a face, a name, a bus route, and a prior record that made the sequence of events on December 14, 1991, not a mystery but a pattern. On the evening of October 2, 2019, King County Sheriff's detectives went to the Yarborough family. Laura Yarborough had been waiting for that visit for 28 years. Nicholas was alive. He was in custody. A trial was possible. The full weight of the legal process, charges, courtroom, verdict, sentence, was available to this family in a way that is not available to every family in this situation. That matters, and it is worth stating plainly. What cannot be recovered is the time. Sarah Yarborough did not have a life between 1991 and 2019. Her family did not have answers. The 28 years are not a procedural footnote, they are the central fact of what this case cost. One permanent gap remains, and it was named by the prosecution itself. Senior Deputy Prosecutor Mary Barbosa wrote in the state's sentencing memo, "It will never be known how Mr. Nicholas was able to force Sarah Yarborough away from the safety of her car, school, and arriving drill team. That question has no answer in the confirmed record. This channel will not supply one." Patrick Nicholas did not testify at trial. He did not speak at sentencing. He has made no public statement at any point in this case. His silence is complete. At the October 2019 press conference, Laura Yarborough told the assembled reporters and cameras that detectives had never given up trying to solve her daughter's murder, even when she had given up at times. On October 3, 2019, King County Sheriff Mitzi Johanknecht announced Nicholas's arrest at a public press conference. She addressed the Yarborough family directly in her remarks. "Few things in law enforcement are more rewarding than informing a parent that you believe you have solved the murder of their child. Last night our detectives were able to tell Sarah Yarborough's parents the news they've been waiting to hear for 28 years. Patrick Leon Nicholas was charged with first-degree murder by the King County Prosecutor's Office. He pleaded not guilty and maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings. In the spring of 2023, Nicholas stood trial at the Malling Regional Justice Center in Kent, Washington. The trial lasted approximately 2.5 weeks. On May 10, 2023, after a day and a half of deliberations, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of first-degree felony murder with sexual motivation, and guilty of second-degree murder with sexual motivation. He was acquitted on the charge of first-degree premeditated murder. On May 25, 2023, King County Superior Court Judge Josephine Wiggs sentenced Patrick Leon Nicholas to 45 years and 8 months in prison. The sexual motivation finding allowed prosecutors to seek, and the court to impose, an exceptional sentence beyond the standard range. Nicholas is eligible for a maximum of 5 to 6 years of earned release time. He is expected to die in prison. At sentencing, retired Sergeant Michael Hatch, the first homicide detective on scene on December 14, 1991, addressed the court and spoke directly to Laura Yarborough. "Thank God we processed the scene the way we did. Laura Yarborough, I apologize that it took so long. The morning I notified you, your husband and family, it broke my heart. The Sarah Yarborough case leaves 3 lessons that anyone with a cold case loved one needs to know." When Sergeant Michael Hatch and the King County Sheriff's investigators processed the Federal Way High School campus that morning, they recovered biological evidence carefully enough to produce a complete male DNA profile. In a year when DNA profiling was, as the prosecutor later described it at trial, really the dawn of DNA. That profile was preserved intact through 3 decades of technological change. It survived long enough for a method that did not yet exist in 1991 to read it, trace it, and return a name. That was not luck. That was a decision made by the people who processed that scene, about how thoroughly to work it, on a cold Saturday morning before anyone knew how long the case would last. If you have a loved one who is a cold case victim, ask the investigating agency directly, is the biological evidence from the original crime scene still in storage, in what condition, and has it ever been submitted for forensic genetic genealogy analysis through a platform like GeneMatch or a licensed genealogy firm? Because the answer to that question could be the difference between a cold case remaining cold and a family getting answers. Patrick Nicholas had a documented history of sexual violence before December 14, 1991. Investigators would eventually confirm at least 5 prior sexual assaults. His name was not unknown to law enforcement, but none of those prior offenses had required him to submit a DNA sample. His profile did not exist in CODIS. Every time detectives ran the crime scene evidence against the national database, and they ran it for years, the search returned nothing, not because the evidence was insufficient, but because the law had never placed Nicholas in the system designed to find him. That is not an investigative failure. It is a structural one. The requirement to submit DNA upon conviction varies by jurisdiction, by charge category, and by the year the offense occurred. In many places, that requirement still does not extend to all sexual assault convictions. If your state has not passed legislation requiring DNA collection upon conviction for all sexual offenses, not only the most severe felony classifications, contact your state legislature's Judiciary Committee. This is a solvable policy gap. Several jurisdictions have closed it. Several have not. Patrick Nicholas lived openly for 28 years. He had neighbors. He rode buses. He used laundromats. He was not in hiding. He was structurally invisible, not because he had concealed himself but because the one system built to surface him had no record of him. He did not need a disguise. He needed only the absence of a database entry. That is what this case reveals about how perpetrators with prior histories of sexual violence remain undetected. The system's reach is only as wide as the laws that feed it. A man with 5 prior assaults and no DNA on file is, from the database's perspective, a man with no history at all. The genetic genealogy databases that identified Patrick Nicholas, GeneMatch, and the consumer ancestry platforms that feed into it depend on voluntary public participation. Every profile uploaded by an ordinary person tracing their family history is another branch on another tree that a forensic genealogist can climb. If you have completed a consumer DNA test through any major platform, check your privacy settings. If you are willing to permit law enforcement matching, opt in. The investigators who solved this case needed a database populated by people who had nothing to do with any crime. You could be the branch on a tree that closes someone else's case. If you've watched this far, leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.